2026 Leon Panetta Lecture Series. The 250th anniversary of the American Revolution. What will be its legacy in the 21st century? This lecture discusses the legacy of the American economy, strong market growth and stability, or another 29 crash. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Sylvia Panetta.
Good evening, everyone, and thanks for the wonderful welcome. It's wonderful to be with you and to see a nice full house. As always, it is a pleasure to welcome you to the Leon Panetta Lecture Series. Coming to you from Leon's hometown, as you know, of Monterey, and the beautiful Monterey Conference Center. We're grateful as ever for the continued support of this community, which makes it possible for these conversations to reach far beyond this room and into classrooms, into homes, and communities across the Central Coast and beyond. This year, we're reflecting on the legacy of the American Revolution, a moment defined by courage, vision, and a profound belief in self-government, particularly in matters related to economics. Which brings us to the subject of tonight's discussion, the legacy of the American economy. The promise of sustained growth, stability, and opportunity has long been central to the American story. Yet today, that promise is being tested, as you know, by rapidly rising costs, shifting global tariffs and trade relationships, rapid technological change, and growing concerns about a record debt and the lack of long-term fiscal discipline. At the center of this conversation is the economic legacy of recent policy choices. Our economy has remained resilient by many traditional measures, but beneath those indicators are concerns about stability, endless wars, growing inequality, affordability, and inflation. Are we building an economy that is durable and inclusive, or one that's increasingly fragile and uneven in its benefits? The war in Iran has introduced new economic pressures, rising energy costs, global uncertainty, and an added fiscal burden at a time when the national debt is already at historic levels. How can we protect our economy from policies and a war that are rapidly increasing prices? Can America restore its reputation as a trusted trade partner? How should our labor force prepare for the consequences of AI? And can we protect our economy from the implications of an AI bubble? Leon will discuss these topics and questions with a distinguished panel of experts whose experience spans economic policy, fiscal leadership, global strategy, and emerging technology. Now, our first guest has spent his career focused on economic policy, labor markets, and the challenges facing working Americans. From 2009 to 2011, he was the chief economist and economic advisor to the vice president. He was also the executive director of the White House Task Force on the Middle Class and a member of President Obama's economic team. Prior to joining that administration, he was a senior economist and the director of the Living Standards Program at the Economic Policy Institute, and he held the post of deputy chief economist at the U.S. Department of Labor. He is the author and co-author of numerous books, including getting back to full employment, a better bargain for working people. Also, crunch, why do I feel so squeezed? And the reconnection agenda, reuniting growth and prosperity. And then 9 editions of the State of Working America. In addition to his work at the Economic Policy Institute, he held posts at the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities and the Stanford Institute for Economic Policy Research. He most recently served as chair of President Biden's Council of Economic Advisors. Now, please welcome Dr. Jared Bernstein.
Thank you.
Our second guest is a former diplomat and a leading expert on global economic and geopolitical strategy. As co-founder of Rice, Hadley, Gates, and Manuel, LLC, and executive director of the Aspen Strategy Group, she advises governments and corporations navigating an increasingly complex international landscape with particular expertise on the evolving roles of the United States, China, and India. She began her career as an investment banker at Salomon Brothers in London and went on to serve as an attorney at WilmerHale, working on Supreme Court and international cases. From 2005 to 2007, she served as an official at the U.S. Department of State as Special Assistant to the Undersecretary for Political Affairs, Nicholas Burns, responsible for Asia policy. In 2017, she published the critically acclaimed book, This Brave New World, India, China, and the United States. Today, she is the executive director of the Aspen Strategy Group and Aspen Security Forum. Please welcome back Anja Manuel. Our third guest brings a record of fiscal leadership at both the state and federal levels. In 2001, he was nominated by President Bush to be the director of the Office of Management and Budget. He developed a reputation for being tough on fiscal discipline. He served as the 12th president of Purdue University, and prior to that served 2 terms as the governor of Indiana. During his tenure, Indiana went from bankruptcy to a AAA credit rating. At Purdue, he prioritized affordability and student success. In recognition of his leadership as both a governor and a university president, he was named among the top 50 world leaders by Fortune magazine in March 2015. Today, he serves as co-chair, along with Leon, of the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget. Please welcome Governor Mitch Daniels. Our final guest is a recognized authority on artificial intelligence and its geopolitical implications. An advocate of responsible AI development, she is the founder of Tamang Ventures, working exclusively with companies at the frontier of AI development. She advises cutting-edge AI and technology companies, has worked with global leaders, including President Joe Biden, Anders Fogh Rasmussen, the former Secretary General of NATO, and Emmanuel Macron, President of France, and has advised on global crises, including the Russia-Ukraine war, Brexit, election, and interference, and information operations during the COVID-19 pandemic. Her 2020 debut book, Deep Fakes, describes how AI will shift the paradigm of human communication. Please welcome Nina Schick. And of course, moderating our discussion is the man who created this lecture series, the former United States representative for this district, and the former director of the CIA and Secretary of Defense. He's also a former White House Chief of Staff, Director of the Office of Management and Budget, and Director of the Office for Civil Rights. As the last person to balance our federal budget, and that's true, he has a lot of wisdom to bring to the conversation. Please welcome Secretary Leon Panetta.
Thank you. Thank you, and good evening, everybody, and welcome to this, our second lecture of the Panetta Lecture Series. Our overall theme is reflecting on the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution. And tonight, we're going to discuss the legacy of the American economy. Will we have a strong market, growth, stability, or are we facing an inevitable downturn, possible recession, or something as serious as a market crash? Over 250 years, the U.S. economy has gone from an agrarian colonial system. Most of our forefathers were farmers or plantation owners, to what is now the largest industrial and service-based economic power in the world. We've come through a lot. We faced a civil war that was fought over what our economy should look like in the future. We have faced recessions and depressions, scandals, but we've also faced incredible inventions and technological innovations that have changed our way of life, expanded our trade, and expanded our markets. Today, as in the past, we've had promises from political leaders of sustained growth, a revival of manufacturing, a rebalance of global trade, lower costs, and, oh yes, a restoration of fiscal discipline. But instead, we have faced just the opposite. Factories have shed 98,000 workers. On and off tariffs have changed the state of global trade. They've increased costs. We're now in a war that has driven up fuel costs to record highs. Consumer confidence is at the lowest level since 1952. And we have a debt approaching $40 trillion. We're facing issues of affordability, inequality, inflation, job loss. Is the American dream still real for all Americans? If we are now going to discuss with my distinguished panel issues related to that economy, and I'm going to begin with kind of asking them to give us their view about what is the state of the American economy. Andrew Sorkin, who's the author of 1929, ends his book with the following quote: "The enduring lesson is not that booms can be prevented or that busts can be fully averted. It is that we need to remember how easily we forget. The antidote to irrational exuberance is not regulation nor skepticism, but humility. The humility to know that no system is foolproof, no market fully rational, and no generation exempt. The greater the heights of our certainty, the longer and harder we fall," unquote. The International Monetary Fund last week had a report that continuing disruptions in the oil markets could slow growth, fuel inflation, and raise the possibility of a global recession. And yet, when word came out that Iran would open the Straits of Hormuz and the war would end soon, the stock market soared, only to have Iran again close the Straits of Hormuz. And what we see as we speak are increased tensions between the United States and Iran. Europe is at the risk of running out of jet fuel in 6 weeks. Fertilizer prices are so high, food prices are sure to follow. There are shortages, supply chains are breaking down. And even if we find peace, it's going to take months to be able to restore the path of fuel in our economy. One investor said, "We know a correction is coming, but everybody wants to live in the present moment." So with that, what is the state of our economy? Is it a strong economy that can survive, or is irrational exuberance going to make us due for a major correction? Is there a disconnect between what the market is signaling and what is actually happening? We'll start with you, Jared.
Well, thank you. It's great to be here with you tonight, and my fellow panelists and Secretary Panetta. It's been such a privilege to hear from you and to join in this day. Let me start on a bit of a Dickensian mode by pointing out that I think the answer to your question, Secretary, is a tale of two cities. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. You just heard the Secretary take you through a lot of pretty gloomy statistics and things that are going on in the economy. But what if I told you that GDP has been holding up really quite well? Markets, as you've heard, have been doing well also. The unemployment rate is 4.3%. It's been lower. When I was in the White House, it was lower. But that's a pretty low rate. Our productivity growth, which is how efficiently we take our inputs and turn them into outputs, for economists, that's kind of the holy grail. That's accelerated. It used to grow at around 1.5%. Now it's growing at 2%. That 0.5% might not sound like much, but trust me, with compounding, it's a big deal. And yet, here's another number. I won't give you the number, but here's another fact to keep in your head. Literally 2 or 3 days ago, we learned that one of the most frequently observed statistics on economic sentiment just hit its lowest level in the history of a series that began in 1952. So that's before even I was born. So there is, you heard Leon say the word disconnect. There is a pronounced disconnect between the overall macro economy, which has been incredibly resilient to all the junk that the current administration has thrown at it, and keeps on ticking. And yet people talk about affordability. People are stressed by price levels already, and then you have the war adding on top of that. We've got a job market that, as you heard from Leon, they call it a no hire, no fire job market. So employers aren't hiring. Thankfully, they're not firing that much. Layoffs are still pretty low. I told you about the relatively low unemployment rate. But it is not a welcoming job market, especially if you're a young job seeker. AI is looking over the shoulder of a lot of people trying to get started. So it's a tale of two cities, and trying to square that circle is how I spend most of my waking life in this business, and I'm sure we'll have more time to talk about that as we go along.
Thank you, Jared.
Anya.
Great, thank you. First of all, thank you, Secretary Panetta and Sylvia, for having us, me for the second time. And it has been such a pleasure to be here today. We met a large group of young people from local high schools and colleges. We laid out all the problems, and then we dumped them all in their laps. And then we were lucky enough to just have dinner with a lot of civic leaders and supporters of this lecture series. And it's really all of you who keep this community going and vibrant and engaged. And so I just want to thank you all for doing this and for having us. Let me pick up on your theme of humility. I'm a former diplomat. I work in geopolitics. And I think whenever you unravel a string in the geopolitical system, it's very hard to figure out where it's going to go. And so far, the strings that have recently been unraveled are not helping our economy. They're hurting it. So let me give you a couple of examples. President Trump's tariffs, the intention was to put a little bit of a barrier and a buffer and to bring good middle-class jobs back to the United States. It's not quite how it's working out yet. Depending on who you ask, the average tariff rate is now 20 to 30% on foreign goods from different countries. And that has impacted our GDP by negative 0.2 to negative 0.3, negative 0.4% of GDP. So right now it's harming us because even though it makes the inputs more expensive, so I see it, the companies I work with, they're slower to start a new factory to build because the input is foreign steel. Sometimes it's foreign cement. So these things have unintended consequences, even though they're well-meaning. Number one is tariffs. Number two, you mentioned, Secretary Panetta, the war on Iran. I don't have to tell you all, you're all reading the news, what's happening with the Straits of Hormuz. Every $10 that a barrel of oil is more expensive subtracts 1/10 of a point of our GDP. So hopefully we will resolve this soon, hopefully this week. And even as you said, Secretary Panetta, once you reopen the straits, you've got to crank up those refineries again. You've got to get that backlog of ships through. You've got to get spot rates for tankers to come down. You've got to get insurance to come down. So the economic consequences are going to be longer lasting. One more, and that's immigration. Our demographics, we were just talking about kids. I think you have 9 grandchildren. He's doing his bit for demographics. Yeah. 4 daughters, 9 grandchildren. But our workforce isn't growing, and immigration is down quite a bit, and that is starting to have a negative impact on GDP. So that's not to say that all of these policies are by their nature bad, but I think sometimes people need to have some humility and think about the second order effects before we start changing things in the international system.
Mitch?
I have to say, first of all, that too many words I could name have fallen out of fashion or out of usage. One of them is statesman, but we have with us tonight one of the people who qualified for that label. So thank you for all that you did for our nation and continue to do, Leon. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I was thinking about humility too. It's in short supply, and people in government, they imagine all sorts of, they harbor all sorts of conceits. You know, people talk about running the economy. Presidents don't run the economy. People don't run states. At their best, they make changes at the margin that make economic flourishing, more or less likely. It's no defense of what's going on right now, and it's not to minimize some of the short-term disruptions that the recent conflict may cause, but I'm not particularly troubled by them. We've been through much worse before, as Leon's intro reminded us. We've seen higher energy prices. We're less reliant on oil than we've been in the fossil fuels era. We're more efficient about the way we use energy, and we have a broader mix, getting broader all the time. So those aren't the things that trouble me. I am much more concerned about looming issues, and I know we'll talk about each of these, so I won't take the time now. But just to summarize, a principal antagonist who is both a military and an economic rival. That's new for us in the era of America's primacy in the world. And a new technology that is swiftly creating an intelligence beyond ours, and machines that may decide we are dispensable or expendable, or at best like the family pet going forward. And those are potential difficulties or crises that we could face. But there's one more which we will face. It's arithmetically certain. The generation that represented in this room has been in default in terms of a fundamental responsibility, the fundamental responsibility of any government solely behind protecting the physical safety of its people, is to be a good steward of the money which it confiscates from them for common purposes. You know, to me, the principal gift that America gave the world 250 years ago is the unequivocal statement that human freedom is the primary value, and protection of the natural rights that not government confers, but that nature confers on humans, is the securing of those rights is the principal legitimate function of government. I used to tell young audiences that we should never when we take $1 away from a citizen, we have just reduced that citizen's freedom by that much. If he or she had the money, they could decide what to do, but we have decided, someone has decided, that there's a collective, communal purpose that's more important, and that's very often true. But we should never do that lightly, and we should never spend it frivolously or ineffectively. But we've done that in an enormous way. So as we approach the 250th birthday of the country, I regret to say that I think we are, the last three generations have failed. We have flunked the test of the maturity of our democracy. We have not made decisions for the long term. We have borrowed money and spent it on today. And thereby we have with absolute certainty created very, very difficult circumstances which younger people are going to have to deal with, and before that very long.
So
Not supposed to clap for disaster, you know. That's
I'm going to present a more optimistic and bullish version of what I think is happening with the United States. And I should preempt this by saying I put my money where my mouth is, because I'm not a US citizen. I actually only moved here 18 months ago. I've lived in Asia, I've lived in Europe, and if you look at what's happening with US GDP relative to even the US, you see over the past decade, a chasm has opened up. And the United States continues to be, in my view, the heart of innovation and capital generation, and will continue to be so. And the primary reason for this is that I think that we're in the foothills of an economic and social revolution that is far greater than any we've seen in history, far greater than the Industrial Revolution, and that is the intelligence revolution. It's specifically to do with what's happening with artificial intelligence. The United States is a leader in this field, and we'll get into what it actually takes to become an AI superpower. And I think that the US will continue because of how important it is, not only to national sovereignty, but also to economic prosperity and to being able to deliver on that promise of the American dream, to all American citizens. I think that the US is going to lead a path ahead, forge ahead. I don't think that anybody in the 250-year history of the United States has won by betting against American innovation. And I don't think that's about to start now, because I'm at the heart of kind of what's happening with the build-out and with the innovation, and I'm more excited than ever, really.
I want to ask a foreign policy question, just because it's in the news, and I recognize all of you in one way or another have had to deal with foreign policy. But on the war, I guess right now, as we know, there are differences. We're not sure whether delegations are going to show up or not show up, and so there's some concern about what's happening. There are a lot of issues on the table. Who handles the Straits of Hormuz? What happens to nuclear enrichment? What happens with inspections and monitoring? Limiting missiles and drones? What happens with sanctions and reparations? Can a hardline regime that feels it stood up to the U.S. and Israel really be trusted? One thing that's concerned me is that normally, from my experience, when you engage in negotiations to end a war, you engage in negotiations to end a war, which takes a while. Doesn't take an hour and a half, doesn't take a few hours. It takes days to basically work through negotiations. That's not something that's going on now. So I guess what I want to ask is, based on what we see happening right now, is this war going to end in a few days, or is it going to be another forever war in the Middle East?
Yeah, thank you. I'll maybe jump in there. This war has to end within the next few weeks, because the economic pain from the strait being closed is so enormous. We're feeling it a little bit here with $6 gas in California. Asia is really feeling it. When you go to South and Southeast Asia now, China, our allies in Japan, Korea, people are driving their cars less, factories aren't running at full speed, they're really suffering. So it's got to end. And on the Iranian side, their economy is basically at zero. It was struggling so much even before this that you had these huge, very courageous protests that hardly made the news here in January and February, where the truly evil Iranian regime, no one's crying over them, mowed down anywhere between 10,000 and 30,000 people. So no one's crying over the regime that fell. But you raise all the right questions. So what have we done? We've been bombing now the US and the Israelis for 6 weeks. We've had substantial success, I would say, in degrading Iran's Navy, Air Force, ability to field missiles that threaten their neighbors. Their uranium, their enriched uranium, is buried deep underground, very difficult to get that out and do anything with it now. But you've also had a slightly predictable, but a circumstance that isn't so favorable. The regime didn't cave. For now, it's a little unclear who's in charge, but it seems to be some form of the IRGC, which is the super hardline military faction. You don't quite know where the Ayatollah is. Is he in the hospital? Is he not? This will continue to work itself out. And I bet that in 9-10 months, you may not have the same Iranian regime you have now. But you're absolutely right, Secretary Panetta, that the pain, the economic pain that's being felt can't go on forever, so everyone's incentives are to at least stop the shooting and then see where we go from there.
Let me talk about the tariffs. It was mentioned in your conversation about the tariffs. We know that the president implemented very, very tough tariffs, but he considered them a tool to restore domestic manufacturing, reduce dependence on foreign goods, and ultimately lower costs. The last time the United States went protectionist was Smoot-Hawley in the early 1930s, and we paid a pretty heavy economic price for that. The Supreme Court has now held that the president did not have the authority to impose tariffs under the law because Congress did not give him that power. So we're now facing a situation where tariffs have been on and off. The president has applied some new tariffs, 10% tariffs that are legally questionable. What's been the economic and trade impact of the Trump tariffs? And can trade relations as they were before, can they ever be restored?
Let me start with the economic piece and then ask some of my more diplomatic-oriented colleagues to answer the latter part of the question about restoration, which I think is so important and which is an open question about a lot of what's happening right now. I really want to hear from both my colleagues but also historians, how have societies recovered? How have governments recovered from a phase like the one we're going through? So on the economy, I guess for one thing is, it seems to me the last time that we ventured into protectionism was actually in Trump's first term, when he initiated a set of tariffs that look pretty mild compared to the ones we're seeing today. And in the Biden administration, which I was a member, we kept those tariffs in place. And I don't think that that was necessarily the smartest thing to do, but it made sense for reasons which I can go into if people want to talk about it. And what's happened every time, both in the Trump administration, latter half of the Biden administration, and much more so now, is that they've not worked. One of the reasons tariffs do not work, where work, I should be very clear, where work means reindustrializing your manufacturing sector, bringing the jobs that were lost back. 50% of our imports are inputs into our own domestic manufacturing. So when you slap all these tariffs on imports, tariffs are nothing more than an import tax, you're making it more expensive to produce here. In Trump 1, those relatively mild group of tariffs pretty quickly put our manufacturing sector into recession. In Trump 2, the same thing has happened. Now let me be clear about something that may surprise you a little bit. I actually think tariffs can be a very useful tool when they're applied to rubber tire grade 4, not to the European Union and Canada, by which I mean there is such a thing as unfair trade. And there is a real germ of truth in what Trump campaigned on. Lots of people, lots of communities have felt and were left behind by globalization. But this is not a good solution. We've seen them put upward pressure on prices, and that was before the war. And what's the one thing that Americans will tell you is their biggest economic burden right now? Affordability. It's a word we haven't heard so much yet tonight in our conversation, but we'll come back to it. And what makes life less affordable for people? Taxes on imports, tariffs, the war and its impact on gas prices. Now, just to be clear, there may be great geopolitical rationale for this war. I think there's arguments that that's not the case in this situation, but there could be. But there's no doubt in my mind that as implemented, sweeping tariffs, I should have mentioned many of which have found to have been illegally applied by the Supreme Court. Interesting issue now that we should maybe get into. Just today, they're starting to talk about how's the government going to refund $166 billion to companies that paid these tariffs. Talk about a logistical headache. But thus far, the economics, in my view, have been almost exclusively negative.
Mitch?
Well, the easy question is are they smart economic policy? No, they're dumb as stump.
Has any manufacturing come back to Indiana as a result of
No, and some have been hurt in the way that Jared just illustrated. Their costs, their input costs are up. So, it may be the only, Jared, correct me, that may be the only topic I can name in which economic opinion from left to right is pretty much unanimous. So that's but I will say just a couple of peripheral comments that I find interesting. One is I celebrate the fact that we went down this path because the Supreme Court, by smacking Trump down on this, offered, I thought, a very good tutorial to us all in this 250th year. There are limits on presidential power. Presidents of both parties have been stretching and stretching unchallenged, executive orders for all sorts of things that more properly the province of the Congress. Article 1, the legislative branch is in Article 1 for a reason. And so I think this, along with a couple of other cases recently, the major questions doctrine and so forth, have been a good reminder to the, I hope, to an attentive public, and I hope to Congress, to step forward as the people's branch and reassert their duty, not just their prerogatives, but their duties. So some good can come out of bad policy. One other thing that interests me, and Jared and I talked about this earlier, very inadvertently, this was a first tiptoe into something that's going to have to become much, much bigger over time, and that's consumption taxation. Now, they didn't think of it that way, but that's what happened because the tariffs are eventually paid by the public. And by the way, isn't it interesting, when they go to refund it, all they can do is refund the business that collected it. Right. Businesses are very unlikely to lower their prices now to rebate it, right?
That's right.
But a subject that maybe we'll get to eventually is, what are we going to do to save the safety net now that we have overpromised, undertaxed, and created in Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, veterans benefits, completely unaffordable promises. Consumption taxation, which every other country in the OECD practices aggressively, which means taxing a much broader swath of society than we do, is going to have to be part of the answer. And accidentally, unintentionally, the tariffs have given us a little exposure to that. Last thing I'll say is I'm hopeful, but I defer to people more knowledgeable about diplomacy in this day and age. I'm hopeful that the pessimists are wrong, that this has permanently changed the nature of the world, that we're now, I'll say doomed, anyway, destined to break into blocks, regional or otherwise. The benefits, economic, and I think just in terms of peaceful interaction between nations, the benefits of generally open trade are so great that I would hope they'd reassert themselves if and when a different set of policies comes to national leadership.
Nina, let's get into AI in the time we have. It's been estimated that more than $3 trillion will be needed to build the data centers needed to prepare for the AI boom. Big tech companies have issued a record $108 billion in bonds in 2025 and continuing to do so in 2026. Will that high level of investment and borrowing be supported by AI growth, or are we heading towards a crash in the speculative market on AI?
I don't think we're headed towards a crash. I think just step back and look at first principles about what is artificial intelligence actually about? Why are we building it? What's the objective? And for 80 years, it's always been about, can we manufacture non-biological intelligence? Because if we can manufacture, literally manufacture, non-biological intelligence, that will unlock a level of scientific discovery and economic growth that's completely unprecedented in the entirety of human history. And that is the point at which we're at right now. So you hear about these model capabilities and how quickly AI is accelerating and these unbelievable sums of money, right? We are right now in the largest ever infrastructure investment in history, predominantly happening here in the United States. Well, why? Well, it turns out that if you want to have AI as this capability that you can broadly distribute throughout the economy to shore up both your prosperity as well as your security, you need to have an industrial base. So it isn't just something that exists in the cloud, right? To actually create and manufacture intelligence at this scale, you need cheap and abundant energy. You need the infrastructure. We're already over $1 trillion committed. And guess what? The demand for that is already far outstripping the supply. right? Only 1% of companies actually have mature AI developments. I mean, just by show of hands, who uses AI in the room? So a lot of you already use AI. Do you use the sophisticated latest models, or is it kind of ChatGPT? That's the worst kind of intelligence that, yeah, it is. So you might think, oh, it's not that good, it hallucinates, it's not very useful. But it's worth remembering that at the frontier of what this intelligence can already do, I'll give an example in terms of how it's furthering scientific discovery. Has anyone heard of AlphaFold?
Yes.
Okay, so AlphaFold is an AI program where it was actually the Google DeepMind research team, American company, that built this algorithm where they thought they would address one of the biggest problems in biology, and that is that you cannot solve human disease or build drugs to solve for human disease unless you understand the 3D protein structures, because proteins are the building blocks of life. They're building blocks of biology. Now, through all our scientific research and study, extremely onerous process, we had uncovered the structures of maybe 270,000 proteins, so basically nothing. You need lots of research, takes years and years to maybe uncover the structure of a single protein. Well, Google DeepMind built this program, AlphaFold, where in a single go, it was able to unfold the structures of 270 million proteins, essentially all the proteins known in the universe. Tell me that isn't furthering scientific research. They won the Nobel Prize for it last year. They've open sourced that, and now there's a whole generation of computational biology companies that are working on top of that knowledge, that scientific knowledge which is generated by AI, to the extent where it looks like in the next 10 years, this moonshot idea of we'll be able to solve all human disease is actually plausible. You know, there's a plausible case that we'll be able to do that. So with that capability, you need a huge industrial base to support the building and scaling of AI through AI factories. And you need to think of this as the greatest potential innovation engine. Now, I've lost my train of thought. What was the original question?
Is it a bubble?
It's not a bubble.
It's not a bubble.
I think the upside, we're still so early, and we even see the extraordinary capabilities in defense, right, in security, where, I mean, when Secretary Panetta, did that, he was leading, of course, director of the CIA at the moment, where you conducted the raid and were able to catch bin Laden. And those kind of intelligent capabilities with AI processing data at warp speed mean that in terms of deterrence, which is what you want, where I think you're entering this new century of technology competition. I think everything that's happening right now in Iran, everything that's happening in Venezuela is a prelude to the bigger geopolitical contest of this century, that one that will define the 21st century, the one between China and the United States. So you need that capability.
Anya?
Yeah, let me just add the international point to that. I think if you ask, is it an AI bubble? I live in San Francisco. Yes, certain investors will lose their shirts and certain companies will go out of business. But overall, I agree with you, Nina, that the build out that is necessary for this technology to flourish is warranted and is the right thing to do. And just to give you an example, China is building not quite on the scale as we are, but compared to their GDP, just about on the scale that we are. I was just before the holidays in a very rural southern province of China, very poor. You drive past these beautiful karst mountains and you come around one corner and mountain after mountain after mountain is covered in solar panels. And you think, why do you need so much electricity here? Well, it's powering all the Baidu and the Tencent data centers that are right there in that province. So the Chinese are doing it, the Middle East is doing it, the Europeans are falling farther and farther behind, the rest of the world is trying to catch up, but we do need to build this infrastructure. And may I just add one point, Mitch, to your very good point on will our Congress come to its senses on trade and will we go back to free trade? I think there is now a seriously protectionist wing of the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. And I predict that when the when the people who are fiscally responsible in the Congress stand up, the free traders will stand up too.
Just one quick point on that.
Go ahead, Jared.
Just a quick point on that, which is, you know, if you took down the Trump tariffs, you'd literally lose, you know, $250 billion a year in revenues, which is, you know, really that's a lot. Clearly, I and I believe Mitch as well would advocate for that, but they would have to be replaced by other revenue sources. I think there's more of a bubble in the AI space, but I actually agree with everything you heard, and I think that those can both be true. I have an op-ed in the New York Times from a few months ago where I argue that a lot of what's going on in that investment space looks pretty bubbly to me. I myself have yet to disinvest, so you know I am not exactly putting my money where my mouth is there. So full admission on that. But the bubble aspect of AI is really about investor patience, and we were talking about this earlier. The idea that investors are putting a lot of money into this. As you've heard, many will lose their shirts, and when that happens, if enough of them decide, you know what, it's just taking too long for this industry to monetize, to find the kinds of enterprise systems that really pay a return on investment that I'm looking for, they may get out, and that will have the consequences that you know even the bullish folks here have admitted. That doesn't mean that AI won't be transformative or deeply productive. The railroads were a horrible bubble and also hugely technologically important. I will say that when I worry about AI, it's not from its financial market impact or this bubble thing we're talking about. It's its impact on potential impact on the labor market, which may be deeply positive, but may be also considerably displacing, and probably some version of both.
Okay, we've already reached the halfway point, and I'd like to, if I can, take a moment to recognize our question review team. These are the people who are responsible for selecting the questions that'll be presented to our speakers. I ask you to hold your applause as I introduce the entire group. Mike Clancy, KSQD, FM 90.7. David Kellogg, who's the managing editor of the Monterey Herald. Doug McKnight, who's a reporter with KAZU Radio. And Pete Weberski, who's the managing editor of the opinion page of the San Francisco Chronicle. Would you thank them, please?
I don't want to clap.
Sylvia and I want to, of course, thank the Panetta Institute Board of Directors, but also all of the lecture series sponsors that make these programs possible and allow us to share these important discussions with all of you, with our audience watching from home, and also with the great students that we had at the student program from across Central and Northern California. Would you please give these sponsors a hand as well? I think there's a question actually along these lines, but I'll ask it. The president is going to be meeting with President Xi in China. And obviously the relationship with China has been impacted by tariffs, by the war. It's been impacted by concerns over Taiwan. If you were advising the president, not that he would take your advice, of course, what would you recommend to the president as to what should be the primary issues to be discussed with President Xi, and where would you want to take it? I'll start with you.
You're asking me. The president's not taking my advice on this. We need to win the technology race with China. It is the one that matters. Nina talked about what's happening in the AI race. Well, it's happening in semiconductors. It's happening in robotics. We don't need to win in every technology, and America doesn't have to go it alone. But the United States and our friends and allies in the West need to be in the lead in the technologies that are fundamental to our national security. And that's pretty broad. And I would say both the first Trump administration and then the Biden administration following up on that have taken some good steps in that direction. But mostly those initial steps were around building a moat around American technology and trying to hobble the Chinese. And we did that with export controls. We did that with limited subsidies for our semiconductor companies. Now it's time to run faster. You can only hobble the other guy for so long before that runs its course, and it's Those policies are not as effective as they probably were 6 or 7 years ago. And so what we should be doing now is really doing our absolute best to ensure that our innovation ecosystem wins. And in some ways, the Trump administration has done some good things there, like they're fixing the procurement in the Defense Department, for example. They're getting a lot of new technologies in there. That's great. But they have fundamentally cut our federal government R&D budgets. Nobody quite understands why. For every dollar spent on high-tech R&D, you get $5 of societal value. That is really money well spent. And they have just decimated it. And there are things you can do that aren't very expensive that would make sure that we remain in the lead, and we're not currently focused on that. So that's where I would start.
Jared?
She loves me not. Sorry.
She loves you not.
I'll be quick. I would say to President Xi, why don't we make a deal? Canada's done this, I think we should too. We will let you sell 100,000 of your EVs here under a quota. If you walk around this country, you don't know that China actually builds EVs, but they do. They do it very well. If you go to Europe or Canada, you'll see more of them, especially Europe. We're going to let you export 100,000 EVs into this country. They're affordable. They're much better for the environment. They even charge pretty quickly. By the way, the CEO of Ford was caught on a hot mic saying, "I love my Chinese EV. Don't anyone try to take it away from me." But if you want to make this deal, and I think the Chinese would, you've got to share your production technology. You have to produce here. You have to engage in joint ventures, which, by the way, was happening in the Biden administration with battery production. There was a Ford project with a Chinese battery producer. And obviously, you have to be very careful about information and cybercrime. There's a lot of boxes you have to check. But I think that would be a real advance, and that would be a way to beat them in a game that they've been playing very well for a long time.
May I? I have to jump in.
Please.
I have to jump
I
in.
realize it's a controversial.
I have to push back very hard on that. So first of all, what I'd advise the president is what Xi Jinping says and what he does is two very different things. And I think that over the past 30 years, we in the West, I grew up in Nepal. If you've seen where Nepal is relative to China and India, we're a tiny Himalayan nation state between these two kind of mega powers in Asia. And we know very well what communism is and what the CCP is, and how what Xi Jinping says and does is very different from what the intent may be. And we know what Chinese policy is, right? And Secretary Panetta knows this too. They don't. It's to use technology as a means to overcome the great century of humiliation so that they can be the dominant world superpower. There's China's next generation AI development plan, which says they will be the leader in AI by 2030. Now, the reason why it's so horrible to ask the Chinese to bring their EVs here is because, again, I really want you to understand this point because it's very important as pertains to manufacturing and supply chains, is because when it comes to AI, right, you might think of AI right now as a chatbot, as something kind of that lives in the cloud or something that you talk to on your device. But this intelligence is increasingly going to be embodied in all forms of hardware. So that means that everything physical, whether it's your electric vehicle, whether it's robotics, whether it's your smart TV, is going to have an AI switch on it. So if you're bringing Chinese hardware into America,
Which we're doing all the time.
well, this is why we need to be able to manufacture and produce our own hardware. This is why, from a national security perspective, I'll give you an amazing example of how Mossad basically took out Hamas's entire leadership because they were able to penetrate the supply chain for their dumb pagers and were able to detonate them all. So it's extremely dangerous to have consumers using the hardware of a strategic rival, which can suddenly be switched on, and that intelligence can be imbued into that hardware, and it can essentially become a weapon. right? A weapon amongst the civilian population. But further to the point about industrialization and kind of the wrong premises we made about globalization, one of the biggest strategic blunders of globalization was offshoring our entire manufacturing base in the pursuit of efficiency. Because now, guess what? China is the world's factory, right? And one of the reasons, the United States was able to win in the Second World War was because of our industrial manufacturing capability. It went from, the 17th largest in the world to basically being able to scale up the production and the manufacturing that was needed to beat the Nazis. Now, of the industries of the future, batteries, EVs, all these critical industries, it isn't that China is just playing catch up. They've already leapfrogged ahead. So it is absolutely essential that we do not become dependent on China for the critical hardware of the future, because otherwise everything that matters in 10 years, we're going to have to not only ask China if we can have it, if they can manufacture it for us, but that hardware actually becomes a hugely dangerous surface area for kinetic attack.
Mitch?
Yeah, very quickly. Let me try to agree with all my fellow panelists.
Good luck.
I mean, EVs may not be the right example, but I do think he should go to that meeting with a menu of potential engagements on things that are of mutual benefit. I'd rather be more engaged with them than in a completely detached posture, which is where too much has lately been heading. But to me, more important than that, I would hope that an American president, and we just have one at a time, would go and say a couple other things. Mr. Xi, you believe that history's on your side. You believe that we are a decadent, degenerate people who will not have the wherewithal financially, economically, militarily, or most importantly, morally, to stand up to your country under your leadership, your ability to mobilize or dominate all the resources and all the people of China. And I'm here to tell you that's not going to work. We intend to win the AI race, which is the one that matters the most economically. You've just seen, and we intend to restore the American military, and we've just had some batting practice, and maybe you noticed that we're pretty good at it, and we intend to be even better in the future. So you're not going to dominate us that way. And then the third one, this is the biggest bluff of all. You believe we are degenerate as a people, that we've lost the will to work, we've lost the will to postpone gratification in order to build a future and protect our children and their future. But no, you've misjudged Americans if you think that's the kind of people we are. We've been up and down before. We always come out, because of our free institutions, we always come out innovative enough, creative enough, and energetic enough to succeed. And we intended to do it again. That's what I would hope an American president would do, even with an open hand toward cooperation where we can.
Okay, we're going to run through these questions, so I'd appreciate the kind of brevity that could get us through as many questions as possible.
Will do.
Governor Daniels, congratulations, you've been elected as President of the United States. What are you going to do about the $40 trillion national debt that you keep complaining about?
Well, I'm going to say to the American people that we have procrastinated. We have converted what could have been a manageable problem, if we'd started early enough, then could have been a problem managed with minimal reneging on promises to a limited number of people, now to a situation where we're going to have to do some very drastic things that are difficult for all sorts of people. We've got to save the safety net. We've made these promises. This is very important to a stable, free society that has taken the pledge that no one will become destitute in their old age. And and that there'll be reasonable provision for people's safety and financial security and health care throughout their lives. And because no one wanted to face up to the cost of that, and we waited as long as we have, we're going to have to do some difficult things. But this is a test of our maturity as a free people. Can we make a grown-up decision here? Grown-ups do think about the future, do plan for it, and postpone gratification of today. So what are we going to do? First of all, we're going to save Social Security. It's a solemn pledge. We're going to have to raise the retirement age to match actuarial reality. We've done it before. We're behind the curve there. We're going to have to do it again. We're going to need to turn it. We're going to have to be honest about it. It's a welfare program. There's no reason to send a Social Security check to Warren Buffett, Bill Gates, or me for that matter. And so that's got to go. We have to means test it, take the scarce resources and commit them to the people who need them the most. We're going to have to stop over-indexing the system. People call it cost of living index. It's not. It goes up with wages, not the cost of living. That maybe was a nice to do at one point. That's got to go. And changes like that, again, they'll have to be more drastic than they would have been if we'd done them when the Bowles-Simpson Commission proposed them, and President Obama and the Congress decided to walk away from it. Medicare will be tougher. We're going to have to, in my opinion, voucherize it. We're going to have to say to Americans, here's an amount adjusted for your income, adjusted for your health status. Here's a menu. You buy the insurance that's right for you. We won't require that a 75-year-old man have abortion coverage. Okay. That kind of thing.
All I have to say is good luck on getting Congress to go along with what you.
Well, the point is you've made so many times, Leon, is only in a crisis. I wish that had been proven. I wish we had proven that inaccurate. The cynics have always said, they're never gonna act until they have to. Well, they were right, unfortunately. That day is coming. And,
okay.
And so that'll force us to take these actions that will be unnecessarily unpleasant. But I do believe that, assuming that the bond markets haven't done it to us first, then the circumstances around the safety net programs as those trust funds go bust will compel it. And in case you didn't know, that's where all the money is.
Mitch, when we were able to balance the budget and get a surplus, I never imagined that either party would want to go back into debt. Yeah. Once we established a balanced budget. Yeah. It was really my thought. Politically, nobody's going to be willing to go back into debt. Yeah. Within 5 years, we were back in debt.
Well, yeah.
So it's it really requires great discipline to be able to make it work.
We put these programs on autopilot, and that should change too, by the way. The Congress, so yes, we were temporarily in balance, but the cake was already baked. These, the escalation of these costs was already there, and without changing it, you were going back into debt, whether you wanted to or not. I said too much, but let me just make one other comment that I think's relevant here. I hope, and I'm willing to stipulate, that Nina's right about the, and I hope underestimating the productivity explosion that AI may bring.
Jared,
here's the thing. I don't want it to become.
Wind them up and watch it go.
I don't want it to become the next.
It's nothing like the national debt that gets them excited.
Filibuster. Only the future of our country we're talking about. It's not a big deal.
Okay, Jared, how have Trump's repeated threats?
Leon, I wanted to get. Let me get this one last thought out.
He's the president.
One more.
People are starting to use, just as they temporarily use this fiction called modern monetary theory, you can just borrow all the money you want, print it in your own currency. People are starting to use the AI productivity improvements as the latest reason to say, don't sweat it. The arithmetic does not add up. Take your most promising forecast and double it. the new revenue won't get here in time. We're going to have to do the unpleasant things. Sorry.
Okay, Jared, how have Trump's repeated threats to unseat Jerome Powell affected the economy, and what happens if he's fired or resigns?
Well, starting from the resigns, I mean, his term is up as chair on May 15th. We're talking about Jerome Powell as chair of the Federal Reserve. So his term is up as chair on May 15th. And if through a bunch of machinations that you can read about on my Substack, because I wrote about it today, the confirmation process for his replacement, Kevin Warsh, that's who Trump has nominated to chair the Fed. If that goes through, then Powell would leave, I believe, on May 15th. If it doesn't go through, he'll stay, and he'll be chair in a pro tempore capacity. And these are complicated machinations I won't get into. Trump has made his life a lot harder, actually, if he really wants lower interest rates. Badgering the Fed, threatening the Fed, and by the way, tariffs and the war, which put upward pressure on inflation and interest rates, all go the other direction. So it is unquestionably the case. History could not be clearer on this, that any economy in which the independence of the central bank has been taken over by the political system has suffered greatly for it. Economies have been brought to their knees, and I can give you recent examples in Turkey where inflation reached 85%. So we reached 9.1. You just cannot underscore enough the importance of Federal Reserve independence, and Trump, I believe, has made a really big mistake in attacking Powell, who, by the way, in my view, has done an exemplary job. So that's where things stand.
Okay, Anya, doesn't the current situation in the Middle East point to a strategic advantage of moving toward green energy and away from dependence on fossil fuels? How do we do that in light of Trump's energy policies?
Yes, it absolutely does. And we should. And I think the Inflation Reduction Act, even though it didn't reduce inflation, is bearing some real fruits. I mean, bringing it back to the data center and the AI conversation, I was with some senior people who work with PG&E this weekend, and the cheapest way to add electricity to our grid right now is solar. Without subsidies, without anything. So I think the green revolution is starting to happen in any event. Now, back on geopolitics, one of the big beneficiaries of this crisis over Iran and the Straits of Hormuz is actually, again, China, because they're so good at all of the clean energies, at the solar, at the EVs, at the batteries. So inadvertently, we're helping some Chinese industries become more competitive.
Building coal plants.
Artificial intelligence data centers currently require significant energy and freshwater resources. How can the U.S. secure the long-term feasibility of AI while protecting the environment?
Great question. The thing about the fresh water has actually been misreported. The water resources that are needed are not what's commonly touted as being this unsustainable environmental requirement. What you do need is liquid cooling systems, but so what it essentially is about is an entire new category of infrastructure, because the hardware runs so hot, right? What is happening in these data centers, I actually don't call them data centers, I call them intelligence factories, because they are literally scaling and training and distributing intelligence like a utility throughout the economy. Right? So that's quite different from a data center which routes email server traffic. And because this is so essential for us to get right, so much money is going into this space, and we talked about how investors might pull out because they're saying, we're not seeing an ROI in our investment. I don't see that happening because the biggest investors are the public tech companies, right? They're not going to pull out. If you listen to what every CEO of the tech company is saying, they're saying the biggest risk is not that we overinvest, the biggest risk is that we underinvest. Every year over the past few years, you've been seeing how their CapEx commitments are going up and up and up. And a big part of this is energy, right? Because if you want to run intelligence itself like a utility, broadly distributed throughout the economy, what's the raw input to make that happen? Well, it's energy, because you need it like electricity. So what you see happening right now is, well, I think the US has a strategic advantage as compared to the rest of the world when it comes to energy, because the US is already the world's largest net energy exporter, right? I am in Texas, where you are at the heart of the build out of this infrastructure. The fact that you can fire this up very quickly with natural gas is huge to US competitiveness. You can't actually use green energies for this because the load has to be very stable, right? There can be no intermittency. If you have a data center, I'm thinking about the biggest intelligence factory in the world right now, which has $40 billion worth of hardware. You cannot have any intermittency or power surges. That has to be maintained through, right now, well, natural gas, and eventually you have to look at solutions like nuclear. And the really amazing thing that's happening, again, speaking to the testament of American innovation and the unique capital ecosystem here, is that the US hyperscalers are now starting to treat energy generation as a core part of their tech stack, right? So Google, Amazon, they're all starting to invest in small modular reactors. Has anyone heard of the Taxpayer Protection Pledge? This was a historic agreement signed a few weeks ago in the White House, where the government agreed to provide regulatory air cover in order to build fast, to help with permitting and things like that. And in response, the hyperscalers pledged to buy, bring, or build their own energy supply. So you're never going to have because it's not politically viable, the hyperscalers understand that. You cannot push that expense of the energy onto the American family, right? So if utility prices go up, obviously no one's going to want to support the hyperscalers' intelligence factory. So in fact, what I think you're going to see is the most kind of dynamic energy market where the costs in the long term, because of this incredible investment, are actually going to go down. And that's why you already, literally, if you had talked to me about this 18 months ago, I would have told you that's a crazy idea, that's science fiction. But already now, in the next few years, I think we're going to start to see the first kind of data centers being launched in space, where you really can tap into the power of solar with no clouds, no nighttime, to keep that energy and that electricity on 24/7 at a base load that far exceeds anything that we had predicted in the past, again, to support this intelligence revolution.
And Nina, just one sentence. I do think that seeing a lot of the people investing in these data centers right now from Silicon Valley, in the short and medium term, people have scaled back their sustainability goals. Net zero is out the window. Everyone's buying gas turbines. So I think the question was, what do we do about the environment?
Exactly. Exactly. Jared, affordability, inflation, inequality. Between tariffs, the war in Iran, increased fuel, fertilizer prices, there's no question that inflation is becoming unacceptable, and you can sense that consumers obviously have lost confidence in the economy. What steps should be taken by the political leaders or the Fed in order to address affordability, inequality, inflation?
Well, when I think about affordability, I don't think about every single thing the market provides, because, like it or not, the market and the price system, they work pretty well for almost everything we buy and sell. So I talk to politicians who say, what can we do about groceries? The typical retail, the typical retail grocer has a profit margin of under 2%. And so for that, yes, I understand grocery prices are a stressor, But the problem was they just went up so fast, so quickly in 21, 22 that people got shocked. You know, things that used to cost $2.50 ended up costing $5, $6, $7 when that kind of an increase should have taken place over a much longer time. So it's just going to take a while for people to acclimate to some of the prices in the market. But when it comes to housing, when it comes to health care, when it comes to childcare and utilities, because what Nina said is right, and unfortunately we already have some of the data centers passing those costs on to consumers. In Virginia, where I live, what's actually one of the things Governor Spanberger ran on and won on, so that externality is already occurring. And so, you know, housing, healthcare, childcare, utilities, those are areas where markets are flawed. I had a great conversation with my dinner partner tonight, who's runs a health sector, health service here in Monterey, and we talked about some of the reforms that are necessary. That would be a whole other panel to go into them, but I believe there's a government role in every one of these areas. We've actually written pieces. I have a policy appointment at the Center for American Progress. We've written pieces on many of them, explaining the kind of policies that will get us there. By the way, especially, you know, and I agree with Mitch on this, but with Mitch on the panel, I have to go there. Some of this stuff is expensive. It can cost $500 billion to stand up an actually equitable, good, effective child care program over 10 years. And why is that? Because a lot of the families who need child care, and let's face it, it's got to be decent quality, they can't afford it. They're just starting out in life, so they need a subsidy. Home builders won't build affordable housing because it doesn't pencil out for them, and the healthcare economics are a mess. So these are market flaws that government policy needs to fix, but we're going to have to raise the revenues we need and cut the spending in areas where we can do so in order to make it pencil out.
Some of these are there's also an element, though, which is government caused. The antidote to high prices is greater supply. We'd have more housing in this country if we didn't have so many regulations in the way, so much red tape in the way. Here in California, you have rules about pork production, which are being imposed on the rest of the country, running up the price at the grocery store. So there are, I think there are things government could quit doing, which would also be beneficial.
Let me just say, Mitch, in our plan, which has been well received on the Hill, we go to these localities and we say, look, if you want help in all of the areas in which the federal government helps you, you need to engage in this kind of upzoning that Mitch is talking about. You need to actually change some of your zoning rules so we can expand the housing supply.
Nina, what country is winning the AI race, and what are the implications if the U.S. does not win the race?
I think that there are two potential AI superpowers in this world, and that is the United States and China. And I think that that is the ultimate geopolitical contest of the 21st century. It comes down to this technology capability. And the reason I keep saying AI is actually because it isn't a technology, right? It's a capability, and that capability is intelligence, and it's the enabler of other critical technologies. So you need to think about the technologies that are absolutely essential to the supply chain of intelligence. And the reason why there's only two superpowers in this race is because of everything it takes to build and deploy intelligence at that scale. And at the very bottom, the foundation, it turns out you need cheap and abundant energy. And of course, that calculus has changed dramatically for the United States over the past decade. China actually has 4x times more energy production than the United States right now. It's building 38 nuclear reactors as we speak. It's a Western technology that is scaled and mastered and can build faster than any kind of Western country right now. But you also need that industrial base that I'm talking about. Why? Because you need it to build the semiconductors. You need it to build the batteries. You need it to build the robotics. So you kind of need that factory for the industries of the future. And only after you have that industrial and resource base do you really get to the model layer, do you really get to the intelligence layer itself. But you cannot lead from the top, right? You cannot become an AI superpower if you don't have that foundation that starts with energy and resources. And so much of what we see right now, these kind of global movements in Venezuela and in Iran have to do with securing the resources, the critical resources, but also the beginnings of new alliances, right? So the United States right now is aggressively trying to develop an alliance structure called Pax Silica, which is specifically around those countries
Nina,
that are essential to
I
the
have to
supply
cut you
chain.
off. Go ahead, just finish your sentence.
Yes, I'm done.
I'm sorry. We've got just about 3 minutes left, and I wanted to get all of you to comment briefly, please, on, it's a question I ask every panel. Are you pessimistic or optimistic about the path of the United States and our democracy in the future? Sure.
I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic. I think Churchill said, when you're going through hell, keep going. And I see a real will among the American people, not everyone, but the majority, who are very unhappy with many of the developments we've been talking about today that are pretty dysfunctional. And I think they're going to decide that the path that we've taken is a mistaken one and get on a better one. And that makes me optimistic.
Anya?
Absolutely optimistic. We've been through so much worse. We've been through the Great Depression. We've been through World War II. We've been through the upheavals of the 60s and 70s. Now, you almost don't remember those. It's going to be okay. And all of these problems that we were talking about, they have policy solutions. So at some point, I mean, you said, is it crisis or leadership? Unfortunately, it's going to, but there'll be a crisis that will make, hopefully, Washington come to its senses on some of these things. But these issues that we raised today are eminently fixable through policy fixes. So I'm optimistic that we can do it.
Mitch?
Also, I teach, and I'm optimistic for young people. Mitch?
Optimistic for two reasons. One, it's the only operating principle that I ever made any sense to me. I had a coach as a kid who used to say, if you say you can or you can't, you're right. And so you have to, I think, approach things from that standpoint. But I'm going to agree for what may sound like a perverse reason. I believe that we're going to go through an enormous crisis. They happen. Most of us in this room haven't lived through one, but we've had them in American history. You know, the Jacksonian Revolution looks like one. The Civil War for sure was one. The Great Depression was one. We're going to have another one from one or another of the causes we've discussed. And the only place I differ, Washington won't come to its senses. It will change institutions. There'll be new institutions arise out of the damage, and Americans have been very good at devising those in the past. We will again.
Nina?
I'm optimistic. I don't think anyone has succeeded in betting against America in its 250-year history, and I don't think that's about to change, especially now.
Good. Ladies and gentlemen, we've covered some interesting territory in the economy and some of the challenges we face. But I agree with the panel. I think the most important thing we have is not the power in Washington. The most important thing we have is the power in this room and the ability of people to be able to enjoy our freedoms, but more importantly, the power to make a difference in terms of our society. And that's really the purpose of this lecture. So thank you very much. Please thank our speakers.